Hi guys, this is a quick lesson on AWS Config. This is a service that may come up for maybe one question in your exam, but it's definitely worth covering off just so that you know what it is, because it's also a useful tool that you might come across in your day-to-day work. AWS Config gives you a resource inventory. So what it does is it will inventory your resources, and what we're talking about here is their configuration. So it creates a configuration item for each of your resources. And these are just a few example services. This could include pretty much anything in AWS and within your account. So it creates a configuration history for your resources in AWS. And what it can also do then is alert you if your resources change from that state. So we call that the desired state. So we create a desired state in AWS Config. We say, for instance, we want to make sure that our security group has a certain rule that blocks a port, or our Amazon EC2 instance must have a certain configuration applied for monitoring. And then we can check periodically to make sure that our resources do match that desired configuration. And if they don't match that desired configuration, then we can actually send an alert through SNS, and we can also perform remediation actions to try and rectify the issue. Now, the configuration is stored in S3. So the configuration items for each of your resources, all that history is actually stored in S3. And we'll have a look into an S3 bucket where this information is stored when we do the lab after the theory section. So when configuration changes occur, that information gets sent to AWS Config. And then Config will evaluate the configuration against the desired configurations that you have configured within AWS Config. And then after it's evaluated the configuration, it will display that information in a dashboard so you can see it within AWS Config. And then also it can send it via SNS. So a bit more background on Config. Config's a fully managed service that provides you with an AWS resource inventory, configuration history, and configuration change notifications for security and governance. So you can discover existing resources, export a complete inventory of your resources with all configuration details, and also determine how a resource was configured at any point in time. So you can go back in time and look at, how was this particular EC2 instance configured when some kind of service issue occurred. You would use these capabilities to enable compliance auditing, security analysis, resource change tracking, and troubleshooting. So you can assess, audit, and evaluate configurations of your resources. So really useful for configuration management as part of an ITIL program. Now, you might be wondering, what is the difference then between Config and CloudTrail? Because we talked a bit about auditing here. So CloudTrail is also about auditing. Remember, CloudTrail records user API activity on your account, so it allows you to see who did what at a point in time, whereas Config records point-in-time configuration details for your resources as configuration items. So you use Config to answer the question, what did my resource look like at a specific point in time, whereas you use CloudTrail to answer the question, who made an API call to modify this resource. So you might use these two tools together, but they do slightly different things. So hopefully that clears that up. And what we'll do next is we're going to go into the AWS Management Console, and we're going to have a look at AWS Config, and we're going to set up a simple rule and see it in action. Hi guys, I'm in the AWS Management Console, and I'm going to head to Services, go down to Management and Governance, and choose Config. Now, if you haven't run config before, you may not see this screen. You might actually be put into a wizard which asks you a few questions. So firstly, it's going to ask you which resources you want to enable config to be able to discover inventory information from. So I just chose to enable all resources within the region, and you can see what resources I have available here. It's then going to ask you to choose a bucket, and the S3 bucket is where the data, each configuration item, is actually going to get stored. Thirdly, it's going to ask you to specify a role. So this is an IAM role that's used for the service, and it will create one by default for you, or you can specify a role. It may then also put you into a wizard to create your first rules. So What will happen then is either you can just continue to add the rule and follow my instructions, or you can exit out of that wizard and then just go to rules on the left hand side here and choose add rule. And what we have is a series of AWS management rules. AWS managed rules. So these are predefined rules that already exist. So they cover quite a few scenarios, but you'll likely want to create your own custom rules. But what we're going to do now is just look for some rules. So firstly, I'm going to type EC2 and I'm going to choose this rule here. And what this does is this checks whether detailed monitoring is enabled for EC2 instances. And I've actually launched an EC2 instance here. And this one is using basic monitoring because that's the default. So that means it will send information to CloudWatch every 5 minutes, whereas detailed means every 1 minute. So this rule will just check to see if my EC2 instances are actually compliant with this rule that states that they should have detailed monitoring enabled. So I'm going to just choose save. I'm then going to go back into add rules and I'm just going to type security, and we should have some rules coming up that are related to security groups. So this one here is the one I'm looking for. So it checks that security groups are attached to EC2 instances or elastic network interfaces. So what that means is every security group in your account, it's going to check whether it's actually being used by an elastic network interface or an EC2 instance. So this is a good way of auditing your rule set to check whether your security groups are being used or whether they're just sitting there not doing anything. So what happens straight away is we can see that we very quickly got a response here that says that we have a non-compliant resource for the detailed monitoring, and the other rule is still evaluating. So let's choose to go in and have a look at this rule, and we can see that we've actually got the ID of the instance actually identified here, and it says it's non-compliant. And that's because we don't have detailed monitoring enabled, so that's exactly what we'd expect to see. You can have a look at a bit more information. For instance, you can see a compliance timeline, and it shows you that, at a certain point in time the resource was non-compliant. You can also look at a configuration timeline, and this will show you things such as the relationships as well. So you can see that this particular instance is related to a network interface, a security group, a subnet, an EBS volume, and a VPC. Now let's head back up to config. Going to have a look in our rules. And now we have 8 non-compliant resources. So I've got quite a few security groups in my account, but I've only got 1 instance running at the moment. So most of those security groups aren't being used. So it's definitely had a look and it's found out that these security groups are not actually currently in use. So those are just a couple of quick examples of what you can do with these compliance rules. I also just want to show you quickly that within the rule, now let's just choose any one at random here, we have this remediation action. So the remediation action can do things like publish an SNS notification, but there's also all these other options here as well. And these are predefined. You can create your own, and you can run Lambda functions and that kind of thing. But you can see there's lots of things that you could do here, like release an elastic IP. You might restart or start or stop an EC2 instance, or terminate an EC2 instance. So there's lots of remediation actions that can be performed. So I'm just going to cancel out of there. Now I did mention I'm going to go into S3, so I just want to show you where the actual configuration items are stored. So in S3 I have my bucket, which is called config bucket DCT labs. Yours will be something different. And if we head into here, we can see we've got a few folders, and then we've got config, and then we've got the region. So this is enabled at a region level. So if I go in, and it's got a whole directory structure based on dates, I suppose, and then we go into here and we can find that we've got lots and lots of configuration items. So as you can see, we've got configuration items for internet gateways, we've got network ACLs, we've got network interfaces, subnets, security groups, volumes, elastic beanstalk, RDS, and so on. So it's found lots of resources in my account, and then it's pulled some configuration information about those resources and stored it in this bucket, and it will keep it there long term as well, which is how you can look into your configuration history and see at a point in time what the resource state was. So as you change or as it reevaluates, it's going to create new configuration items and keep those in your S3 bucket as well. So that's just a quick overview of config. Now to delete our rules, we can hit edit, If we just go down to the bottom, we can hit delete rule, and then I'm just going to repeat that for the other rule, and that's it. So that's it for this lab, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget, if you have launched any resources, to go and terminate them, and I'll see you in the next lesson.